He replaced me with his mistress. She accidentally helped me destroy him. My name is Dana Marsh. I was 36 years old. For 12 years I was married to a man named Colin Marsh, and for 12 years I believed I had a good life. We lived in a nice house with a big kitchen. Colin owned a company that sold office furniture. I worked part-time as a bookkeeper, but I did most of the work for Colin's business too. I did his invoices. I paid his workers. I filed his taxes. Colin always said, "Dana, you're the reason this company doesn't fall apart." I believed him. We had one daughter, Ruby, who was 10 years old. She had Colin's brown eyes and my stubborn chin. Every Sunday, the three of us made pancakes together. Every Friday, Colin brought home flowers, even cheap ones from the gas station, just to say, "I saw these and thought of you." I thought we were happy. I really did. Then, about 8 months before everything fell apart, Colin hired a new assistant. Her name was Priya Shaw. She was 28 years old, smart, and very good at her job. Colin talked about her a lot at dinner. "Priya fixed the whole scheduling system today," he said one night, smiling into his soup. "She's a genius." "That's great," I said. I meant it. I didn't feel worried. Why would I? Colin talked about people at work all the time, but slowly, the talk changed. He didn't just say, "Priya did this," or "Priya said that." He started saying, "Priya understands me." He started staying late at the office. He started checking his phone under the table at dinner, smiling at something, then quickly putting it face down when I looked over. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself 12 years of marriage doesn't just disappear because a man works late a few nights a week. I was wrong. It started small. Colin stopped kissing me good morning. He stopped asking about my day. He started coming home smelling like a perfume that wasn't mine. Something sweet, like vanilla and flowers. One night, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. Dinner for two at a fancy restaurant downtown on a Tuesday when he said he was working late with the team. I didn't say anything right away. I'm not proud of that, but I was scared. I didn't want to be right. If I asked him and he lied, I would know something was broken that I couldn't fix. So instead, I watched. I paid attention. I became a detective in my own home. I noticed he started going to the gym more, buying new clothes, getting a haircut every 2 weeks instead of every 2 months. I noticed he started locking his phone with a new passcode. I noticed he stopped wearing his wedding ring because it doesn't fit right anymore, even though it fit fine 6 months earlier. One Saturday, Ruby had a school event, a small art show where her paintings were on display. Colin promised he would come. He didn't show up. He texted me an hour before. "Sorry, big client emergency. Can't make it. Tell Ruby I'm proud of her." I sat in that gym, watching my daughter search the crowd for her father's face, and I felt something in me go cold and hard, like a stone dropping into water. That night, after Ruby was asleep, I looked at Colin's laptop, which he had left open on the kitchen counter. I know it wasn't right to look, but I was his wife, and something told me I needed to know the truth. I found an email folder labeled Vendor Files. Inside it were messages between Colin and Priya. Not about vendors. Love messages. Plans to meet. Photos I wish I could forget. I sat at that kitchen counter and read every single one, and by the end, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely close the laptop. Colin was having an affair with Priya Shaw. It had been going on for almost 7 months. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not right away. I sat there until the sun came up, thinking. When Colin woke up the next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, like every other morning. He didn't notice anything wrong at first. "Morning," he said, grabbing his coffee. "How long have you been sleeping with Priya?" I asked. His face went white. The coffee cup shook in his hand. "Dana, Don't lie to me," I said. "I read the emails. I know everything. 7 months, Colin. 7 months of dinners and gifts. And lies. 7 months of you missing Ruby's art show for client emergencies." He set the cup down slowly. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might cry, beg for forgiveness, promise to end it. Instead, he sighed, like I was the problem, like I was making things difficult for him. "Dana, I've been unhappy for a long time," he said. "You're always so busy with the books, with Ruby, with everything. Priya sees me, she listens to me. I run half your company for free, I said, my voice shaking now. I've given you 12 years. And I'm grateful, he said, in that calm voice that made me want to throw the coffee at him. But grateful isn't the same as happy. I stared at this man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and I understood, in that moment, that the marriage was already over. It had been over for months. I was the only one who didn't know it yet. Colin didn't wait long. 2 weeks after I found out, he told me he wanted a divorce. Not because he felt guilty, because he wanted to be with Priya, openly, without hiding. I think it's better this way, he said, like he was doing me a favor. I hired a lawyer named Grace Liu, a small, sharp-eyed woman who didn't waste time on kindness she didn't mean. She looked at our finances and shook her head. Dana, do you understand how much of this company you actually built? She asked me, during our first meeting. I did the books, I said. I wasn't an owner. You did more than the books, Grace said, looking at years of records I had brought her. You negotiated with vendors. You handled payroll. You even signed contracts on his behalf, more than once when he was traveling. Did he ever pay you for this work? No, I said. I mean, we were married. It was our money. Grace tapped her pen on the table. Not anymore, it isn't. Not once the divorce goes through. And there's something else you should know. Community property law means that if you contributed unpaid labor to build his business during the marriage, you may be entitled to a much bigger share of that business than he thinks. I hadn't thought of it that way. To me, it had always just been helping my husband. I never imagined it as something with a dollar value, something the law would recognize. How big of a share? I asked. Grace smiled, just slightly. Let's find out. I want to tell you that I hated Priya from the very first moment. But the truth is more complicated than that. About a month into the divorce process, I ran into her by accident. I was picking up Ruby from a friend's house, and Priya was there too, waiting in her car outside, because apparently Colin had asked her to pick up Ruby that day instead of coming himself. I walked up to the car and she rolled down the window, clearly not expecting me. Oh, she said. Dana, hi. Up close, she didn't look like a villain. She looked tired. Younger than I expected, in a work blazer that seemed slightly too big for her, like she was still growing into her job title. I'm getting Ruby, I said. Colin can go back to being unreliable on his own time. Priya's face went red. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For all of this, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Nobody ever means for it to happen this way, I said. That's what everyone says. She looked down at her hands on the steering wheel. He told me you two were already separated, living like roommates. He said the marriage had been over for a long time before I ever came along. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. We made pancakes every Sunday until 3 months ago. We were not living like roommates. Priya's face changed. Something shifted behind her eyes, like a small crack forming in a wall she had built to protect herself. He told you that? I asked. That we were already separated? Yes, she whispered. That's not true, I said. None of it. I didn't know about you until I found the emails myself. Priya didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. He told me a lot of things. I didn't know it then, but that small conversation, in a parking lot, on an ordinary afternoon, would become the first crack in Colin's whole carefully built world. Over the following weeks, Grace and I dug deeper into Colin's company. What we found surprised even her. Colin's furniture company, called Marsh Office Supply, looked successful from the outside. Nice office, good clients, steady growth. But the actual financial records told a different story. Colin had been taking money out of the business, big chunks of it, to pay for things that had nothing to do with the company. Trips, jewelry, a rented apartment downtown that I later learned was where he and Priya met, twice a week, for 7 months. He's been using company funds to pay for his affair, Grace said, looking at the numbers on her screen. This isn't just a moral problem, Dana. This is possibly fraud, depending on how the business is structured and who else has a financial interest in it. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means, Grace said slowly, that if we can prove this properly, it changes everything. Not just how much of the business you're entitled to. It could mean serious legal trouble for him, separate from the divorce completely. I sat with that information for a long time. Part of me wanted to feel joy. Colin had hurt me, hurt Ruby, and now he might finally have to pay for it in a way that mattered. But another part of me, a quieter part, felt strange about it all. I didn't want revenge just for the sake of revenge. I wanted the truth to come out. I wanted Ruby to grow up knowing her mother didn't just quietly disappear from a marriage where she had given everything. 2 weeks after our parking lot conversation, Priya called me. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Dana," she said, her voice shaky, "I need to talk to you. Please." We met at a small coffee shop, away from both our normal lives, in a part of town neither of us usually went to. Priya looked worse than before, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. "I found some things," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "On Colin's work laptop. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to finish a report and I found a folder I wasn't supposed to see." "What kind of folder?" I asked. "Financial records," she said. "Payments to an apartment, payments to jewelry stores, payments that don't match anything in the official company books." She looked up at me, her eyes wet. "He told me he was taking me on trips using his own personal savings. He told me the apartment was something he already owned before he met me. He lied to me too, Dana, about almost everything." I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not quite sympathy, but something close to it. This woman had helped destroy my marriage, but she had also been lied to, used, and manipulated by the same man who had lied to me for years. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm angry," Priya said, "and because I think you deserve to know the truth. All of it. Not just the parts that make him look bad to you. The parts that show what kind of person he really is." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots, messages between Colin and a business partner, discussing how to move funds around so his accountant, meaning me, wouldn't notice certain payments. Messages where Colin called me predictable and easy to manage, because I trusted him completely and never asked hard questions. Reading those words hurt more than finding the affair emails had, because it wasn't just that he had cheated. It was that he had planned it, calculated it, treated our whole marriage like a system he could quietly manipulate without me ever noticing. "Will you help me?" I asked Priya. "Will you give copies of this to my lawyer?" Priya was quiet for a long moment. I understood what I was asking. If she helped me, she would be admitting, officially, that she had seen these records, which meant admitting her own involvement in whatever Colin had done. It could cost her a job, maybe more. "Yes," she finally said, "I'll help you. I owe you that much at least." With Priya's help, Grace built a much stronger case than we ever could have alone. The financial records showed a clear pattern. Colin had been moving money out of Marsh office supply for over a year, funneling it into personal accounts, hiding the transactions under vague labels like vendor consulting and equipment maintenance. Grace explained it to me carefully. "This isn't just about the divorce anymore, Dana. If the business has outside investors, or if there are business partners who didn't know about these withdrawals, this could become a legal case completely separate from your marriage. Fraud, possibly embezzlement, depending on how the company is structured." End quote. It turned out Colin did have a business partner, a quiet, older man named Frank Delgado, who had invested money into Marsh office supply years earlier in exchange for a small percentage of ownership. Frank had mostly stayed out of daily operations, trusting Colin to run things honestly. When Grace reached out to Frank's own lawyer, sharing some of the financial records Priya had provided, Frank was furious. He had no idea Colin had been taking money out of the company for personal use. He immediately hired an accountant to do a full audit. The audit found even more than we expected. Over 18 months, Colin had taken out more than $200,000 in unauthorized withdrawals. Frank decided to take legal action against Colin, separate from my divorce case. And because I had done so much unpaid work for the company over the years, payroll, contracts, vendor negotiations, Grace argued that I was owed a portion of the business's value, based on my labor, regardless of how the divorce settlement turned out. Colin's perfect little world, the one he built by lying to everyone around him, was starting to crack apart from every direction at once. Colin didn't know about any of this until the day Frank confronted him at the office. I wasn't there, but Priya told me about it later, because she still worked there at the time. though not for much longer. She said Frank walked into Colin's office with the audit report and slammed it on the desk. "Explain this," Frank said. Colin apparently tried to talk his way out of it, calling the numbers a misunderstanding, blaming a bookkeeping error. But Frank had already talked to his lawyer. He wasn't interested in excuses. "You've been stealing from this company," Frank said. "From me. And I want every penny back, or I'm taking this to the police." Colin, according to Priya, turned pale and started sweating. He tried calling his own lawyer immediately, but by then, the documents were already filed. The truth was already out. That evening, Colin called me, his voice tight with panic. "Dana, we need to talk," he said. "Frank is threatening to press charges. This is insane. This is all some kind of misunderstanding." "I know exactly what it is, Colin," I said calmly. "I've seen the records." There was a long silence on the phone. "You knew?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "I know everything," I said. "The money, the apartment, the lies you told Priya about our marriage, the lies you told me about working late." I paused. "You built your whole life on lies, Colin, and lies always fall apart eventually. You just didn't think it would happen this fast. Did you do this?" he asked, his voice rising with anger now. "Did you go behind my back with Frank?" "No," I said. "You did this to yourself. I just stopped protecting you from the truth." Priya quit her job at Marsh Office Supply, a week after Frank's confrontation with Colin. She told me later that staying there felt impossible, not just because of the awkwardness with Colin, but because she couldn't stand being associated with what the company had become in her mind, a place built on secrets and stolen money. She found a new job a few months later, at a different company, in a different part of town. We didn't stay close friends, exactly. Our relationship was too complicated for that, built on a shared betrayal that neither of us had chosen but both of us had lived through. But we did stay in occasional contact. She sent me a message on Ruby's birthday, months later, saying simply, "I hope she's doing well." "I think about that day in the parking lot a lot," I wrote back. "She's doing great. Thank you for what you did. It mattered more than you know." I don't think Priya set out to destroy Colin. If anything, she seemed in her own way just as hurt by his lies as I was. But her honesty, once she decided to be honest, became the exact thing that brought his whole world crashing down. Sometimes the person who helps you most isn't the person who planned to help you at all. Sometimes they're just someone brave enough to finally tell the truth when it matters. With Frank's fraud case moving forward and Priya's evidence supporting my claims, my divorce settlement looked very different from what Colin had originally expected. He had assumed, I think, that because his name was on the business, he could walk away with most of it, offering me a small settlement and calling it generous. Instead, Grace built a case showing years of unpaid labor, contracts I had negotiated, payroll systems I had built from nothing, all of which had directly increased the value of Marsh Office Supply. The court eventually awarded me 40% ownership of the company's value, recognizing my years of unpaid contributions as a legitimate part of the marital assets. Combined with the fraud case Frank had filed, which resulted in Colin having to pay back a large portion of the stolen funds, Colin's financial situation became far worse than he ever imagined. He also lost majority control of the business itself. Frank, furious about the stolen money, restructured the ownership, bringing in a new manager to oversee daily operations. Colin kept a small stake in the company, but he was no longer the man in charge. The company he had built his whole identity around no longer belonged to him in the way it once had. I walked away from the marriage with a settlement that let me buy a small house for Ruby and me, with enough left over to start my own bookkeeping business, helping other small companies the same way I had helped Colin's for over a decade. Except this time, I got paid for it, properly, with my name on the contracts. The year after the divorce was hard. Ruby struggled with the changes at first. New school, new house, a father who called less often than he promised. Colin, busy trying to rebuild whatever was left of his reputation and finances, wasn't as present as Ruby needed him to be, and I had to help her work through that disappointment more than once. But slowly, things got better. Ruby made new friends at her new school. She joined an art club, encouraged by a teacher who noticed her talent from that school art show Colin had missed all those months ago. I started my bookkeeping business with 3 small clients. then 6, then 12. Word spread that I was careful, honest, and good with numbers. Qualities, ironically, that Colin himself used to brag about to his friends when talking about me. I also started running, something I had never done before. At first it was just to clear my head, but eventually it became something I looked forward to every morning, a small piece of time that belonged only to me. About a year and a half after the divorce, I ran into Priya again, this time at a coffee shop near my new office. She looked healthier than the last time I had seen her. Brighter, more confident. "You look good," she said, smiling. "So do you," I said, and I meant it. We sat and talked for almost an hour, catching up on the pieces of our lives that had moved on since that difficult year. She told me she was seeing someone new, someone kind, someone who didn't lie about being married. I told her about my new business, about Ruby's art club, about the small house with the big kitchen where we made pancakes every Sunday now, just the two of us. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me quietly. Everything that happened, fighting for the business, the settlement, all of it. I thought about the question carefully before answering. "I regret that it happened at all," I said. "I regret 12 years built on lies I didn't know about, but I don't regret fighting for what I earned. I don't regret making sure the truth came out." End quote. I paused. For a long time, I thought being a good wife meant staying quiet, trusting completely, never asking hard questions. I learned the hard way that trust without honesty isn't really trust at all. It's just hope, dressed up to look like something stronger. Priya nodded slowly. I think I needed to hear that too. I heard, through mutual friends, that Colin eventually moved to a smaller apartment across town. His relationship with Priya, unsurprisingly, didn't survive the fallout from everything that happened. She told me once, briefly, that after everything came out about the stolen money and the lies he had told both of us, she couldn't look at him the same way anymore. "It's hard to build something real with someone," she said, "when you find out the whole foundation was made of lies to two different people at the same time." Colin tried reaching out to me a few times after the divorce, usually late at night, usually after a few drinks, judging by the messy spelling in his texts. He would say things like, "I made a mistake," or "I miss how things used to be," or "Do you think we could have coffee sometime, just to talk?" I never responded to those messages, not out of anger anymore, but because I had nothing left to say to him. The version of Colin I had loved for 12 years, the version who brought home gas station flowers and made pancakes every Sunday, had never really existed the way I thought he did. Or maybe he had existed, once, and slowly became someone else, someone who valued being admired more than being honest. Either way, that chapter of my life was closed. I didn't need an apology to move forward. I had already done the harder work of rebuilding without one. 3 years after the divorce, Ruby turned 13. She had grown into a confident, thoughtful young girl, still stubborn, still passionate about her art, now taller than I expected her to be at this age. One evening, while we were making dinner together, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, were you scared when you found out about Dad and everything?" I set down the spoon I was holding and thought about how to answer honestly, in a way a 13-year-old could understand. "Yes," I said. "I was terrified. I didn't know who I was without our family being whole. I didn't know if I could take care of you on my own, financially or otherwise." "But you did it anyway," Ruby said. "I didn't have a choice," I said. "Sometimes the scariest thing isn't doing something hard. It's staying somewhere that isn't honest, just because leaving feels even scarier." Ruby was quiet for a moment, stirring the pot on the stove. "I'm glad you left," she finally said. "I mean, I wish Dad hadn't done what he did, but I like our life now. It feels more real, somehow, even though it's smaller." I hugged her then, right there in the kitchen, flowers still on both our hands from the biscuits we were making, and I thought about how far we had come from that morning when I sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, waiting to ask my husband a question I already knew the answer to. People sometimes ask me, when they hear this story, whether I feel guilty about how things turned out for Colin, whether destroying him, as some people like to phrase it, feels like something I should regret. Here is what I tell them. I didn't destroy Colin. Colin destroyed the life he built, all on his own, through years of small lies that eventually became too big to hide. What I did was refuse to keep protecting him from the truth. I stopped covering for his mistakes. I stopped assuming the best about someone who had shown me, again and again, that he didn't deserve that assumption. Priya didn't destroy him either, not really, not on purpose. She simply told the truth when she found something that didn't sit right with her conscience. She could have stayed quiet. She could have protected Colin the way I once protected him without even realizing I was doing it. Instead, she chose honesty, even though it cost her a job, a relationship, and a version of her own life she had probably imagined for herself. Sometimes the people who help us most are not the people who plan to be heroes. Sometimes they are simply people brave enough to tell the truth at the exact moment it matters most, even when telling that truth is difficult, even when it costs them something too. Colin built a life on lies, and lies, no matter how carefully constructed, tend to fall apart on their own timeline, not ours. All Priya and I did was stop holding up the walls once we saw the cracks. 5 years after the divorce, my bookkeeping business had grown into a small firm with 4 employees. I had my own office now, with my name on the door in gold letters, Marsh Bookkeeping Solutions, though I sometimes joked with Ruby that I should change the last name, since it didn't really feel like mine anymore in the same way. "Keep it," Ruby told me once, now 16 and full of opinions. "It's not his name anymore. It's yours." "You earned it." She was right, in her own teenage way. The name Marsh had once meant Colin's wife to me. Now it meant something I had built myself, brick by brick, invoice by invoice, client by client, starting from almost nothing after the divorce. Colin remarried eventually, to someone I never met, someone younger than Priya had been. I heard through the same mutual friends who kept me loosely updated on his life that things weren't going particularly well for him financially. Without full control of Marsh office supply, and with a reputation in the local business community that had been permanently damaged by the fraud case, he struggled to find the same kind of success he once had. I didn't feel joy about that, exactly. I felt something quieter, a kind of peace, knowing that the truth, once it came out, had settled into its proper place. Colin was living the life his choices had built for him, just as I was living the life my choices, and my honesty, had built for me and for Ruby. Priya, the last I heard, was happily married to someone new, running her own small consulting business. We didn't talk often anymore, but every year, around Ruby's birthday, she still sent a short message, and every year I still wrote back. If there's one thing I've learned from everything that happened, it's this. Silence protects the person doing the lying, not the person being lied to. For 12 years I stayed quiet, trusted completely, worked hard, and told myself that being a good wife meant not asking hard questions. I was wrong. Being a good partner, a good parent, a good person, means being honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable, even when honesty threatens to destroy something you've spent years building. Colin built his life on lies because he assumed the people around him, me, Priya, Frank, would keep protecting him from the truth, the way I always had before. The moment we all stopped protecting him, his whole world came apart, not because we planned some elaborate revenge, not because we plotted against him in secret meetings, simply because we chose, each in our own way, to stop pretending we didn't see what was right in front of us. Ruby is 17 now, getting ready for college, talented and confident in ways I sometimes still can't believe I helped create. She knows the whole story now, not the painful details, but the shape of it, that her father made choices that hurt our family, and that her mother chose honesty over silence, even when it was hard. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she told me recently. Not the divorce part, the part where you didn't just accept things you knew were wrong. I hope she remembers that lesson, long after she's forgotten most of the details of this story. I hope she carries it into her own life, her own relationships, her own hard choices. Because in the end, Colin didn't lose his marriage, his business, and his reputation because I destroyed him. He lost all of it because he built his whole life on a foundation of lies, and eventually, as lies always do, that foundation cracked apart under its own weight. All I did was stop pretending the cracks weren't there. People think the hardest part of a divorce is the divorce itself. The papers, the lawyers, the fighting over who gets what. Nobody warns you about the years afterward, the slow, quiet work of building something new out of what's left. By the time Ruby stood on a stage in a green cap and gown, holding a diploma with her name printed in gold letters, 7 years had passed since I sat at that kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and asked my husband a question I already knew the answer to. Ruby was 18 now. Taller than me by an inch, with the same stubborn chin she'd had since she was a baby, the one people always said she got from me. She'd gotten into 3 colleges, but she chose the one 2 states away, a school with a strong art program, and a scholarship that covered almost everything, because Ruby had never wanted to owe anyone more than she had to. I used to think that was a lesson she learned from watching me untangle myself from Colin's mess. Now I think some of it was just Ruby being Ruby. I sat in the bleachers that day next to my business partner, Nadia, a woman I'd hired 4 years earlier who had become something between a coworker and a sister. Colin sat several rows away, on the other side of the gymnasium, next to a woman I didn't recognize. Not his second wife. I'd heard through the same web of mutual friends that this marriage had already ended, quietly, without the fireworks of mine. This was someone new, or maybe someone old. I didn't ask, and nobody offered. When they called Ruby's name, I stood up before I meant to, clapping harder than the parents around me, and I caught Colin doing the same thing from across the gym. For one strange second, our eyes met over the sea of graduation caps, and something passed between us that wasn't quite forgiveness, and wasn't quite anger either. It was just 2 people who used to share a life, watching the one good thing that survived it walk across a stage. Afterward, in the parking lot, Colin found me near my car. Ruby was still inside, taking pictures with friends, and I hadn't planned on speaking to him at all. "She did good," he said, hands in his pockets, looking older than I remembered. His hair had more gray in it. The confidence he used to wear like a coat, the one that made him seem larger than any room he walked into, had thinned out somehow. "She did," I agreed. "I know I wasn't around as much as I should have been," he said. "These last few years, it wasn't because I didn't care." I didn't say anything. I'd learned, over time, that I didn't owe Colin my reactions anymore. Silence wasn't submission the way it used to be. Now it was just a boundary. "Anyway," he said, when I didn't respond, "tell her congratulations from me." "I already told her, but tell her again, from me." He walked off toward the woman waiting by his car, and I stood there for a moment, watching him go, feeling nothing sharp enough to call pain anymore. Just a dull, familiar ache, like an old scar that only bothers you when the weather changes. Ruby came out a few minutes later, diploma tucked under her arm, grinning in a way that made the whole ceremony worth sitting through. "Did Dad talk to you?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "A little," I said. "He said congratulations." "He told me that too, twice." She rolled her eyes, but not unkindly. "I think he practices what he's going to say now, like he's worried he'll get it wrong." "Maybe he is," I said. Ruby looked at me sideways. "You're not still angry at him?" I thought about that question the whole drive home. "I'm not angry the way I used to be," I said finally. "I think I used up most of my anger a long time ago. What's left now is just history. He's part of my history. I don't have to carry him around anymore, but I don't have to hate him either. Both of those things take energy I'd rather spend on other things." "Like what?" Ruby asked, smiling. "Like you," I said. "And the business. And maybe, someday, myself." The house felt different after Ruby left for school in August. I'd known it would. Every friend who'd sent a kid off to college warned me about the quiet, the strange ache of walking past a closed bedroom door that used to always be half open with music leaking out from underneath. But knowing a thing and feeling it are different animals entirely. The kitchen, especially, felt too big. Ruby and I had spent 7 years making Sunday pancakes in that kitchen, just the 2 of us, ever since the first Sunday after Colin moved out, when I'd stood at the stove crying into the batter, trying to make our old tradition survive without him. Ruby had come downstairs that morning, 11 years old, taken one look at me, and picked up the spatula herself. "I got it, Mom," she'd said, in a voice too calm for an 11-year-old. "You sit down, I'll flip them." She'd burned the first batch badly enough that we'd ordered pizza instead, and we'd laughed about it until we cried different, better tears. That was the day I understood Ruby wasn't going to just survive what Colin did to our family. She was going to help me rebuild it. Now the pancake sat unmade on Sunday mornings, the pan hanging on its hook, and I drank my coffee alone at a table built for three that had shrunk, over the years, into a table built for two, and now felt too big for one. Nadia noticed the change in me before I said anything about it. We'd built Marsh bookkeeping solutions together, starting with 3 clients in a spare bedroom I converted into an office, growing slowly into a real firm with a real office downtown and, now, 6 employees instead of 4. Nadia had a gift for reading people that made her invaluable both with clients and with me. "You're doing the thing again," she said one Tuesday afternoon, dropping a stack of invoices on my desk. "The thing where you work through lunch because you don't want to go home to an empty house." "I'm not doing a thing," I said. "I'm working." "Dana," Nadia sat down across from me, arms crossed. "I've known you 4 years. I watched you build this company out of nothing, while raising a teenager, and pretending you weren't lonely the entire time. Ruby's gone now. You don't have an excuse to keep pretending." "I'm not lonely," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. "Okay," Nadia said, in the tone of someone humoring a friend who wasn't ready to hear the truth yet. "But there's a client dinner Thursday night, the Whitfield contract renewal, and I need someone charming to come with me, because you know I hate small talk. You're coming, and you're going to eat something that isn't a granola bar at your desk, and you're going to talk to actual adult humans about things that aren't spreadsheets." I went, mostly because arguing with Nadia took more energy than agreeing with her. The dinner was at a mid-priced Italian restaurant downtown, the kind with candles in old wine bottles, and a waitstaff who all seemed to know each other's names. The Whitfield contract belonged to a small chain of hardware stores whose owner, Robert Whitfield, was there with his son Marcus, who ran the day-to-day operations now that his father was easing into retirement. Marcus was maybe 42, with an easy laugh and the kind of quiet competence that made me trust him within the first 10 minutes of conversation, the way you sometimes just know a person is exactly what they present themselves to be, without the exhausting work of reading between lines. He asked good questions about the business, listened more than he talked, and when the conversation turned briefly to families, he mentioned, without any weight behind it, that he'd been divorced for 6 years and had a teenage daughter of his own, currently deep in the same college application chaos Ruby had just survived. "It's a strange thing," he said, "raising someone almost entirely on your own, and then watching them not need you anymore, all at once, like flipping a switch." "I just went through that," I said. "Almost exactly. My daughter left for school in August." "How's it going?" he asked. "The empty house part." "Badly," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. "I keep the porch light on for her out of habit, even though she's 400 miles away." Marcus laughed, but gently, not unkindly. "I still set 2 plates sometimes," he said, "before I catch myself." We didn't exchange numbers that night. It felt too soon, too much like something Colin might have done, moving fast toward something new, before I'd finished sitting with something old. But Marcus started coming to more of the quarterly check-in meetings than his father's retirement strictly required, and somewhere in the space between contract renewals and casual conversation, I found myself looking forward to those meetings in a way that had nothing to do with hardware store accounting. Marcus and I didn't rush anything, in the months after that first Italian dinner with the candles and old wine bottles. I'd rushed once before, in a way, not into the marriage itself, which had felt slow and certain at the time, but into the trust that came with it, handing over pieces of myself without asking enough questions first. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice, and Marcus, to his credit, never once made me feel like patience was an inconvenience to him. We met for coffee on Saturday mornings, sometimes just the 2 of us, sometimes with Nadia along when she teased that she wanted to supervise, which really meant she wanted an excuse to eat pastries and interrogate Marcus about his intentions in the gentlest, most terrifying way possible. He answered every question honestly, even the ones that clearly caught him off guard, and I watched Nadia's guarded expression soften, week by week, into something like approval. "He's boring in the best way," Nadia told me one evening, after Marcus had left following a dinner at my house. No secrets simmering under the surface. No working late that isn't actually working late. It's almost suspicious how normal he is. I used to think normal was something to escape from, I admitted. Colin made ordinary life feel small, like something I should be grateful he tolerated. It took me years to understand that ordinary, honest, unremarkable love is actually the rarest thing there is. Marcus asked me, one Saturday in November, whether I'd be comfortable meeting his daughter, Chloe, a junior in high school at the time, sharp-tongued and skeptical of her father's dating life, in the specific way teenagers are skeptical of anything that might disrupt the fragile equilibrium they've built after their parents' divorce. "She's not going to be rude to you," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely certain of that. "She's just going to test you a little. She tested the last 2 women I dated pretty thoroughly." "How many were there?" I asked, half joking. 2, in 6 years, Marcus said. "Neither of them lasted very long. Chloe didn't run them off, exactly. She just asked enough honest questions that they realized, on their own, they weren't serious enough about me to stick around and answer them." I met Chloe for the first time at a diner near her school, deliberately public, deliberately low stakes, the kind of setting Marcus had clearly chosen with real thought. Chloe was polite in the guarded way of someone who had learned not to invest emotionally in her father's relationships until they proved themselves worth the investment. "My dad says you run your own accounting firm," Chloe said, stirring her milkshake without looking up. "Bookkeeping firm, technically," I said, "but close enough. Is that hard, starting a business by yourself?" "It was one of the hardest things I've ever done," I said honestly. "I started it after my divorce, with almost nothing, 3 small clients, and a spare bedroom I turned into an office." Chloe looked up at that, something shifting in her expression. "My mom always says Dad's divorce was no one's fault, like it just happened to both of them equally. Was yours like that?" "No," I said, deciding honesty was the only currency worth spending with a girl who'd clearly had enough of adults softening things for her. "Mine happened because my husband lied to me for a long time, about a lot of things. It wasn't a mutual, gentle ending. It was messy and it hurt, for a long time." Chloe studied me for a moment. "That's more honest than most adults are with me," she said. "I appreciate that." By the time we left the diner, Chloe had relaxed enough to ask me detailed, genuinely curious questions about Ruby's art, about what it was like raising a daughter alone, about whether I thought her father was actually happy or just performing happy for her benefit. I answered every question as truthfully as I could, and something in that honesty seemed to settle whatever test she'd been quietly running the whole meal. "You can keep coming around," Chloe told me, with the particular gravity of a 17-year-old delivering a verdict. "I like that you don't talk to me like I'm made of glass." Colin's resurfacing, when it happened, came in the form of a letter, actual paper, actual ink, mailed to Ruby's college dormitory address, instead of our house. Ruby called me about it on a Sunday evening in October, her voice tight in a way I recognized from years of listening for exactly that tone. "Dad sent me a letter," she said. "A real letter, like handwritten. What did it say?" There was a pause, the sound of paper unfolding on the other end of the line. "He says his business with Frank finally settled the last of the appeals. He says he's, his word, not mine, starting over. He wants to know if I'd consider spending part of winter break with him. He says he wants to make up for lost time." I sat with that for a moment before answering, trying to separate my own history with Colin from whatever Ruby needed to hear right now, at 19, from her mother instead of her ex-husband's ex-wife. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Ruby said. "Part of me wants to say no, just because of everything. But part of me feels like, I don't know, like maybe if I don't at least try, I'll wonder about it forever. Like it'll turn into one of those regrets you carry around without meaning to." "That's a very mature way to think about it," I said. "I learned it from someone," Ruby said, and I could hear the small, wry smile in her voice. I thought carefully before I answered her next question, which was really a request for permission she didn't strictly need, not anymore, not at 19. "Ruby, you don't need my blessing to see your father. He's still your dad, whatever else he is, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about you getting hurt again, the way you did when he missed things, when he promised things he didn't follow through on. I know, Ruby said quietly. I remember all of that too, Mom. I'm not going in blind. I think I want to see if he's actually changed, or if he's just saying the things people say when they're trying to look better than they are. That's fair, I said. Just protect yourself the way you'd protect anyone else who's let you down before. Trust actions, not promises. That's very you, Ruby said, laughing softly. You should put that on a poster. Ruby spent 5 days with Colin that December, in the small apartment he'd moved into after his second divorce, the one Priya had once described to me, all those years ago, as somewhere across town, smaller than what he was used to. She came back with a mixture of feelings too complicated to sort into simple categories. Colin had tried, she said. He'd cook dinner some nights instead of taking her out, which felt like an attempt at something real instead of performance. But he'd also, twice, brought up money, vague comments about how tight things were, how the settlement with Frank had taken more than it should have, how he wished things had gone differently with the divorce. He wasn't asking me for money outright, Ruby told me afterward, but it felt like he was building up to it, like he was testing whether I'd offer. Did you? I asked. No, Ruby said, a little sharply, like she was almost offended I'd asked. Mom, I'm a college student. I don't have money to give anyone. And even if I did, she stopped herself. Even if you did? I prompted. Even if I did, Ruby said slowly, I don't think I'd give it to him. Not because I don't love him. I think I do, somewhere, even after everything. But because giving him money would feel like helping him avoid the consequences of his own choices again. And I don't think that's love. I think that's just what you called it once, protecting someone from the truth, even when they've earned the truth catching up with them. I didn't say anything for a moment, struck by how clearly Ruby had absorbed a lesson I'd spent years learning the hard way myself. You okay? Ruby asked, noticing my silence. I'm just proud of you, I said. That's all. Frank Delgado called my office in February, a call I hadn't expected and almost didn't take, since my assistant told me the name and I assumed, briefly, it might be some kind of trap connected to Colin somehow, old habits of suspicion that hadn't fully faded even years later. Dana, Frank said, his voice as steady and unhurried as I remembered it from the one time we'd met in person, briefly, during the fraud proceedings years earlier. I hope it's all right that I called. I got your business number from an old mutual contact. It's fine, I said. What can I do for you, Frank? I wanted to give you a heads up about something, he said. Colin's been coming around the business again. Not officially. He doesn't have any real authority anymore. Not since the restructuring. But he's been talking to some of our smaller vendors, trying to set up what he's calling a consulting arrangement on the side. I think he's trying to build something new, using contacts he still has from the old company. Is that legal? I asked, given everything that happened. Legally, it's murky, Frank said. He's not technically violating the settlement terms, as far as my lawyers can tell, but I wanted you to know because some of what he's been saying to vendors involves your name. That got my attention immediately. My name? What is he saying? He's been telling people you two are on good terms now, implying some kind of ongoing business relationship between you and him, using that to make himself sound more credible to potential clients. Nothing outright fraudulent, nothing I could take to a lawyer. Just implication, the kind of thing a man says when he wants people to trust him and doesn't have much else to offer as proof. I sat back in my chair, feeling an old, familiar anger rise up, quieter than it used to be, but no less real. Thank you for telling me, Frank, I said. I appreciate it. I remember what he put you through, Frank said. What he put all of us through. Honestly, in different ways, I don't forget things like that easily. If he tries to use your name again, in a way that actually crosses a line, let me know. I've got no patience left for him, and neither does my lawyer. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, turning the information over in my mind. Part of me wanted to call Colin directly, to tell him plainly to stop using my name to prop up whatever he was trying to rebuild. But another part of me, the part that had learned patience the hard way, decided to wait, to see what Colin actually did with the rope Frank had just handed me, rather than reacting before there was something concrete to react to. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks after Frank's call, Colin reached out to me directly, something he hadn't done in almost 2 years, not since the last drunken late-night text I'd never answered. This time, though, the message came during business hours, carefully worded, clearly rehearsed. Dana, I know things ended badly between us, and I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I've been thinking about starting a small consulting business, helping other small companies with the kind of operational stuff I used to handle at Marsh Office Supply, and I thought, given everything you learned running your own firm, maybe there'd be a way for us to work together somehow. Not as a couple, obviously, just professionally. I think we'd be good at it. I think people would trust us together, given our history. I read the message twice, then a third time, trying to understand what exactly Colin thought he was asking for. Did he genuinely believe that after everything, after the affair, the stolen company funds, the fraud case, the lies to both me and Priya, I would agree to publicly attach my name and my hard-earned reputation to a business venture with him? I thought about Frank's warning, about the vendors Colin had already been quietly name-dropping me to. This wasn't really a request for partnership. It was an attempt to secure, in advance, my public cooperation with a story he'd already started telling without my permission. I called Grace Liu, my old divorce lawyer, who I hadn't spoken to in years, but who I still trusted more than almost anyone in a professional capacity. She remembered the case immediately. Of course, some cases stay with lawyers, the way certain scars stay with the people who survived them. He wants what now? Grace asked, half laughing, half incredulous, when I explained the message. A business partnership, I said. Or at least my name attached to his new venture, whatever it actually is. Dana, I want to be very clear with you, Grace said. You have absolutely no legal obligation to give this man anything. Not your name, not your time, not your reputation. He burned through all of that a long time ago. I know that, I said. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something, some angle he might be working that I'm not seeing. The angle is simple, Grace said. He's trying to rebuild his credibility using the one asset he has left that people might still trust. You. Your name is worth something now, Dana. You built a real, honest business from nothing. That's valuable to him, precisely because he doesn't have anything like it himself anymore. I wrote back to Colin that evening, keeping my response short, deliberately professional, closing a door I didn't want left even slightly open. Colin, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I have no interest in any kind of professional partnership with you, now or in the future. I'd also ask that you stop implying to vendors or potential clients that we have any kind of ongoing business relationship. If that continues, I'll have my lawyer send a formal request to stop. I hope your new venture goes well, but it needs to go well without my name attached to it. He didn't respond to that message, not that night, not for weeks afterward. But Frank called again in April to let me know the vendor comments had stopped entirely, as if Colin had understood, finally, that this particular door was closed for good. Success, I learned in those years, never arrived and simply stayed put. It had to be defended, over and over, sometimes from directions I didn't expect. The scare came in May, nearly costing me the very client whose contract renewal dinner had first introduced me to Marcus. Robert Whitfield, Marcus's father, had fully retired by then, leaving Marcus in complete control of the hardware chain, and it was Marcus himself, awkwardly, apologetically, who called to tell me that one of the chain's regional managers had raised a concern about a discrepancy in the quarterly reports Marsh Bookkeeping Solutions had filed. I want to be clear, Marcus said, his voice tight with the particular discomfort of someone forced to separate a professional obligation from a personal relationship. I don't think this is anything you did, but I have to take it seriously, and I have to ask you about it directly, the same way I'd ask any vendor. I appreciated, even in that stressful moment, that he didn't try to soften it or wave it away out of loyalty to our relationship. It was, in its own strange way, more proof of the honesty I'd come to trust in him. The discrepancy turned out to be real, though not in the way anyone initially feared. A junior employee at my firm, eager and inexperienced, had misclassified a series of equipment purchases, an honest mistake rather than anything deliberate, but one that had thrown off 2 consecutive quarterly reports, enough to raise red flags with Whitfield's internal auditors. I caught the error myself within a day of Marcus's call, working through the weekend with Nadia to trace every transaction back to its source, determined to hand Marcus a complete, transparent accounting of exactly what had happened and exactly how we planned to fix it, rather than the kind of vague reassurance Colin used to offer whenever numbers didn't add up the way they should. "Here's everything," I told Marcus, laying out a full report on his desk on Monday morning, refusing to let our relationship soften the professionalism of the moment. "Here's the mistake, here's who made it, here's how we caught it, and here's what we're changing in our review process so it doesn't happen again. If you want to move your account to a different firm after seeing this, I'll understand completely." Marcus read through the report carefully, taking his time, the same quality of careful attention he'd shown that very first dinner, listening more than performing. "Dana," he said finally, "this is exactly why I trust your firm. Not because mistakes never happen. They happen everywhere. It's because when they do happen, you don't hide from them. You hand me the whole truth, unprompted, before I even have to ask twice." "I learned the hard way what it costs to hide mistakes instead of owning them," I said. "I'm not interested in building anything, personally or professionally, on anything less than the whole truth, even when the truth is inconvenient." The Whitfield account stayed with Marsh Bookkeeping Solutions, and the junior employee, mortified by her error, became, over the following years, one of my most careful and detail-oriented team members, having learned early exactly how much honesty and quick correction mattered in our line of work. I told her once, gently, over coffee, that the mistake itself mattered far less than what she did after discovering it, a lesson I'd learned in the hardest possible way, at a kitchen table, years earlier, holding 2 cups of coffee and a truth I could no longer avoid. Ruby came home for spring break in March, taller somehow, though she was 19, and shouldn't have still been growing, carrying herself with the particular confidence of someone finding her footing in a life entirely her own. Her art had shifted, she told me over dinner the first night back, moving away from the careful, realistic paintings she'd done in high school toward something looser, more abstract, more willing to take risks that might not pay off. "My professor says I'm finally painting like I have something to say," Ruby told me, showing me photos on her phone of recent work, canvases full of color and motion that felt, to my untrained eye, like they were straining against some kind of invisible frame. For a long time, I think I was just painting things carefully because I was scared of getting them wrong. "That sounds familiar," I said. "Yeah," Ruby said, smiling at me over her pasta. "I wonder where I learned that." We talked about Colin's message to me, the one about the business partnership, since Ruby had heard a slightly different version of the story from her father directly during a phone call a few weeks earlier. "He told me you weren't ready to move forward yet," Ruby said, rolling her eyes so hard I was surprised they didn't get stuck. "Like you were the one being difficult." "That sounds like your father," I said, unable to keep a note of dry amusement out of my voice. "I told him that wasn't fair," Ruby said. "I told him you built your whole business from nothing, without any help from him, and he doesn't get to borrow your success just because his own thing fell apart." "You didn't have to defend me," I said, though something in my chest warmed at the fact that she had, unprompted. "I know I didn't have to," Ruby said. "I wanted to. Someone should, and it might as well be me." "You spent enough years defending both of us on your own," I asked her, carefully, about Marcus, since Ruby had met him briefly during a visit home in January, a dinner I'd nervously arranged after months of increasingly obvious not-quite dates disguised as business meetings. "I like him," Ruby said immediately. "He's the opposite of Dad in every way that matters. He actually listens when people talk, instead of waiting for his turn to say something impressive." "That's a low bar," I said. "It shouldn't be," Ruby said. "But apparently it is, given our family history." She reached over and squeezed my hand across the table. "I'm happy for you, Mom. Genuinely. You've spent so long building things for other people. The business, me, all of it. I like seeing you build something just for yourself, for once." That spring, Marcus and I stopped pretending our meetings were only about hardware store accounting. Our first real date was quiet, almost deliberately so. Dinner at a small restaurant neither of us had been to before. No history attached to it. No ghosts of old marriages hovering over the tablecloth. Marcus told me about his own divorce. A quieter, sadder story than mine, involving a wife who had simply fallen out of love with him over the slow accumulation of ordinary years. No affair, no villain, just two people who had drifted until there was nothing left connecting them but a daughter and shared property taxes. I used to think my divorce was somehow less valid than dramatic ones, Marcus told me, over the second glass of wine. Like it didn't count as real heartbreak, because nobody cheated, nobody lied, nothing exploded. It just ended, quietly, the way some things do. Heartbreak doesn't need drama to be real, I said. Mine had plenty of drama, and honestly, I think I would have traded some of it for quiet, if I'd had the choice. Would you? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. I thought about that question seriously before answering. No, I admitted. Not really. The drama, as awful as it was, gave me clarity. I knew exactly what I was dealing with, exactly what I needed to walk away from. I think quiet endings might actually be harder, in their own way. At least I never had to wonder if I was imagining things. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, the first time he'd done that, and I let him, surprising myself with how natural it felt, how little fear I carried into it compared to what I might have expected, given everything. I hadn't heard from Priya in almost a year, when her message arrived that June, longer than our usual once-a-year check-in around Ruby's birthday. This one came with actual news attached, delivered in the careful, considerate way Priya always wrote to me, like she was still, after all these years, being gentle with a wound she'd once helped create. Dana, I hope this finds you well. I wanted to tell you something before you heard it through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, since that's apparently how news about Colin always seems to travel. I ran into him a few months ago at an industry event, completely by accident. We talked, briefly, mostly about work. He mentioned the consulting business he's trying to start. He also mentioned you, in a way that made me uncomfortable, implying a closeness between you two that I know, from our own history, isn't accurate. I told him as much. I thought you should know, in case it comes up elsewhere. I called Priya that evening instead of texting back, something we rarely did anymore, our relationship having settled comfortably into the rhythm of occasional written check-ins rather than actual conversation. Thank you for telling me, I said, once we'd exchanged the usual updates. Her consulting business thriving, her marriage to a man named David, who sounded, from everything she said, refreshingly uncomplicated. Frank warned me about something similar a few months back. Colin's been trying to borrow credibility using my name. That tracks, Priya said, a note of tired familiarity in her voice. He tried something similar with me, actually, a while back, asked if I'd be willing to give a reference for potential clients, said it would help both of us move forward. I told him no. Why would he think either of us would help him? I asked, genuinely curious about the psychology of it, even after everything. Priya was quiet for a moment before answering. I think Colin genuinely believes he's owed something, she said slowly. Like the world took something from him that he deserved to keep. I don't think he's ever fully understood that he did this to himself. I think, in his mind, we're the villains who ruined a good thing, rather than two people who simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of choices he made entirely on his own. That's a very generous read of him, I said. I've had a lot of therapy since then, Priya said, with a small, dry laugh. I had to do a lot of work understanding why I let myself get pulled into that mess in the first place. Some of that work involved understanding Colin better than I ever wanted to. How is David? I asked, deliberately steering us toward lighter ground. He's wonderful, Priya said, and I could hear the genuine warmth in her voice. He's the kind of person who tells the truth, even when it's inconvenient for him. I didn't understand how valuable that was until I lived without it for a while. I understand that completely, I said, thinking of Marcus, of the quiet, uncomplicated honesty he brought into a life that had spent so long tangled up in someone else's lies. Are you seeing someone? Priya asked, picking up on something in my voice. I am, I said, smiling despite myself. His name is Marcus. He runs a hardware store chain. It's very unglamorous and very wonderful. I'm happy for you, Dana, Priya said, and I believed her completely. You deserve unglamorous and wonderful. You deserve boring, honest, Sunday morning pancakes kind of happiness after everything. Funny you mentioned pancakes, I said, laughing now. That's still a tradition in this house, just with different people around the table these days. The consulting business Colin had been trying to build fell apart entirely by that autumn, though I only learned the details secondhand, through the same web of mutual acquaintances that had kept me loosely informed of his life for years, whether I wanted the updates or not. It turned out that without the credibility of an established company behind him, without Frank's original investment and reputation to lean on, and without either Priya or me willing to lend him the kind of trust by association he'd been counting on, Colin had struggled to attract more than a handful of small, short-term clients. Worse, one of those clients had eventually discovered inconsistencies in Colin's billing practices, small but troubling echoes of the same financial habits that had cost him everything the first time around. That client had gone public with a complaint on a local business review site, and word had spread quickly in the small, interconnected world of local business owners. Ruby told me about it during a phone call in October, having heard the news from Colin himself during one of their now regular but still carefully guarded phone calls. He tried to explain it to me like it was some misunderstanding, Ruby said, sounding more tired than upset, the particular exhaustion of someone who had heard this same story from her father too many times to feel much surprise anymore. Said the client didn't understand the invoice structure. Same excuse he gave Frank, basically just with smaller numbers this time. How do you feel about that? I asked carefully. Honestly, Ruby said, kind of sad, but not surprised. I think some people just don't change, Mom. I think Dad genuinely believes his own excuses, even when they're the same excuses that already destroyed his life once before. It's like he can't see the pattern, even when it's right in front of him, happening again in slow motion. That must be hard to watch, I said, thinking of my own years of watching Colin construct careful, comfortable lies, first to me, then to Priya, then to Frank, and now, apparently, to a whole new set of people who hadn't yet learned to see through him. It is, Ruby admitted, but I think it's also kind of freeing, in a weird way. Watching him do the same thing again helps me understand it wasn't ever really about me, or about you, specifically. It's just who he is. It makes it easier to love him without expecting him to be someone he's not. That's a wise way to think about it, I said, struck again by how much clearer Ruby's understanding of her father had become than mine had taken years to develop. I learned it from you, Ruby said. Watching you deal with him all these years, you never expected him to suddenly become honest. You just stopped letting his dishonesty control your life. I think I finally figured out how to do the same thing, just from a different angle. Colin called me directly in November, his voice carrying the particular strain of someone whose careful self-narrative was cracking under pressure it couldn't fully explain away. Dana, I need to talk to you, he said, without preamble. This whole thing with the client complaint, it's spiraling. People are talking. I think maybe if you said something publicly, vouched for my character, it might help calm things down. Colin, I said, keeping my voice level, I'm not going to do that. Why not? He asked, and I could hear real confusion in his voice, like he genuinely couldn't understand my refusal. We were married 12 years. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for exactly what it was, I said. 12 years, most of which I now understand were built on things you were hiding from me. I'm not going to lend my name, or my reputation, to help you avoid consequences you've earned twice now, in almost exactly the same way both times. That's cold, Colin said, an old, familiar edge of hurt creeping into his voice, the same tone he used to use when he wanted me to feel guilty for not simply trusting him without question. It's not cold, I said. It's honest, something you've had trouble with for a long time, Colin. I learned, eventually, that honesty isn't cruelty, even when it doesn't give someone what they want to hear. He didn't say anything for a long moment. I really have changed, you know, he said finally, quietly. I know it doesn't look like it right now, but I have. Maybe you have, I said, and I meant it as generously as I could manage. But changing means actually doing things differently. Colin, not just wanting people to believe you've changed while doing the exact same things you always did. I hope you figure that out eventually. I really do. For your sake, and for Ruby's. I hung up the phone that day feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not vindication, just a quiet, settled kind of sadness for the life Colin kept building and rebuilding on the same unstable foundation, over and over, apparently unable to recognize the pattern even as it repeated itself in front of him. I mentioned the call to Marcus that evening, half expecting him to be irritated on my behalf, the way I sometimes still was on my own behalf when Colin's name came up unexpectedly in my day. Instead, Marcus just listened, quietly, the way he always did, until I'd finished explaining the whole exchange. "Do you ever feel sorry for him?" Marcus asked, once I was done. I considered the question honestly before answering. "Sometimes," I admitted, "not enough to help him. Not enough to change my mind about anything. But sometimes, yes. I think Colin genuinely believes the world is doing something to him, rather than understanding he keeps doing the same thing to himself. That's a lonely way to move through life, always looking for someone else to blame." "That sounds like the real punishment," Marcus said. "Not the lawsuits or the settlements or any of it. Just having to live inside his own head, telling himself a story that keeps falling apart every time reality catches up with it." "Maybe," I said. "I try not to spend too much energy imagining what it's like inside his head. I spent 12 years doing that, trying to understand him, trying to explain him to myself in ways that let me keep trusting him. I don't have any interest in doing that work anymore, on his behalf or my own." "Good," Marcus said simply, reaching over to take my hand. "You've done enough work for that man to last several lifetimes. It's someone else's turn now, if it's anyone's turn at all." Ruby came home for winter break that December, 20 years old now, in her final year of college, already fielding job offers from small design studios that had seen her senior portfolio work. She'd grown into someone I recognized and didn't recognize at once, the particular strange experience of watching your child become fully, completely herself, someone shaped by you, but no longer defined by you. We sat in the kitchen one evening, the same kitchen where we'd made pancakes for 9 years, where I'd learned to be a different kind of mother than the one I'd expected to become, and Ruby asked me a question that caught me off guard, the way her questions sometimes did, arriving fully formed from some place of quiet reflection I hadn't known she was doing. "Do you think I should stop seeing Dad?" she asked, "now that things are falling apart for him again?" I thought carefully before answering, aware of how much weight my response might carry, aware that this was Ruby's decision to make, not mine, no matter how much history I carried into any opinion I might offer. "I don't think that's my decision to make for you," I said, "but I can tell you what I've learned, if that helps." "Please," Ruby said. "You don't owe your father your presence just because he's your father," I said slowly. "Blood doesn't obligate you to stay in someone's life if being in that life costs you your own peace. But you also don't have to cut him off entirely just to punish him, if seeing him doesn't actually hurt you. The question isn't really about him. It's about what kind of relationship, if any, actually serves you, going forward." Ruby was quiet for a moment, turning her mug of tea in slow circles on the table. "I think I want to keep some kind of relationship with him," she said finally. "Not close, not like it used to be when I was little and thought he hung the moon, but something. I don't want to build my whole life around either loving him uncritically or hating him completely. I think I want something in between, something honest." "That sounds healthy," I said. "I learned that from you too," Ruby said, smiling. "You never told me to hate him. You just told me the truth and let me figure out my own feelings about it." "That's the only way I knew how to do it," I said. "I didn't want you growing up carrying my anger like it was yours. Your anger, if you have any, should belong to you, built from your own experience of him, not borrowed from mine." "I don't think I'm angry exactly," Ruby said, considering the question seriously. "I think I'm just clear-eyed about him now, in a way I wasn't when I was younger. I see him as a person who made really damaging choices, who's still in some ways making similar choices, and who I can care about without expecting him to be different than he is." That's remarkably mature, I said. I had a good teacher, Ruby said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. That same visit, Ruby met Marcus properly for the first time, an extended dinner rather than the brief, nervous introduction from the previous January. She came to me afterward, once Marcus had left, with a look on her face I recognized as her considering something look. I like him, she said. A lot, actually. He asked me real questions about my art, not just polite ones, and he laughed at your jokes like they were actually funny, not like he was performing being charmed. You noticed that? I asked, surprised. Mom, I spent my whole childhood watching Dad perform being a good husband at dinner parties, Ruby said. I know the difference between performance and genuine interest. Marcus isn't performing anything. He just likes you. It's kind of nice to watch, honestly. It is nice, I admitted. I forgot how nice it could be, being with someone who doesn't need an audience to be kind. Ruby graduated the following spring, 21 years old, diploma in graphic design and illustration in hand, and turned down a comfortable, well-paying position at a marketing firm in favor of a much smaller salary at a boutique design studio that specialized in book covers and independent publishing. Work she described, eyes shining, as the only thing I've ever wanted to actually do with my life. Are you sure? I asked her, over the phone, unable to entirely keep the worried mother tone out of my voice, even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't do that to her the way certain relatives had once done to me. The marketing job pays almost twice as much. I'm sure, Ruby said, without a trace of hesitation. Mom, you built a whole business from nothing because you refused to keep doing work that made you feel small, even when it would have been easier and safer to just keep doing Dad's books forever for free. I think I learned that lesson pretty well. She moved into a small studio apartment in the city, barely large enough for her bed, her drafting table, and a kitchenette she used mostly for coffee and cereal. And she called me nearly every Sunday morning during those years, continuing our pancake tradition from 400 miles away, both of us cooking the same recipe in our separate kitchens, while talking on speakerphone, laughing about burnt edges and uneven batter, keeping something small and constant alive across the distance. It was during one of those calls, Ruby's spatula clattering against her own small stove, that she told me about the phone call she'd had with Colin the week before, the one that finally, fully closed something between them that had been slowly closing for years already. He called asking for money, Ruby said, her voice flat in a way that told me she'd already processed most of her feelings about it before deciding to share it with me. Not directly at first. He talked around it for almost 20 minutes, about how hard things have been, about some new venture he wants to try, a franchise opportunity he says just needs a little capital to get off the ground. Then he asked if I had any savings I might be willing to invest, since I was doing well now at my new job. What did you say? I asked carefully. I told him no, Ruby said, clearly calmly, the way you always told me to be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. I told him I loved him, but that I wasn't going to give him money for another venture, especially not after everything that happened with the last one and the one before that. I told him if he wanted to rebuild trust with me, it wasn't going to happen through borrowed money. It was going to happen through him actually following through on things, consistently, over time, the way trustworthy people do. How did he take that? I asked. Not well at first, Ruby admitted. He got quiet, then a little sharp, said something about how I sounded just like you now, like that was supposed to be an insult. Was it? I asked, half laughing despite the tension in the story. I told him it was the nicest thing he's ever said to me, Ruby said, and I could hear the small, proud smile in her voice even through the phone. Sounding like you is something I've been working toward my whole adult life, Mom. I don't think he meant it that way, but I took it that way anyway. Colin didn't call again for several months after that conversation, and when he finally did, it was a shorter, quieter call, apparently having spent the intervening silence doing some of his own reckoning. He didn't ask Ruby for anything that time, just checked in, asked about her job, mentioned, almost shyly, that he'd started seeing a therapist, something he said, almost like a confession, probably about 15 years too late. Do you believe him? I asked Ruby when she told me about that second call, about actually trying to change this time. I don't know, Ruby said honestly. I think I believe he wants to believe it about himself. Whether he actually follows through, I guess we'll find out, the same way we always find out with him. Not from what he says, but from what he actually does, over time. That's the only way anyone finds out anything true about anyone, I said. Words are cheap. Time is the only thing that can't be faked. Marcus and I married 2 years later, in a small ceremony in his backyard, string lights strung between old oak trees, folding chairs arranged in careful rows for the 40 or so people who mattered enough to include. Ruby stood beside me as my maid of honor, 22 years old now, graduated, working at a design studio in the city where she'd gone to school, having decided, for now, to build her adult life somewhere entirely her own, rather than returning to the town that held so much complicated history. The morning of the wedding, Ruby helped me get ready in the small guest room Marcus had cleared out for the occasion, steaming the wrinkles out of a pale blue dress I'd chosen, specifically because it wasn't white, because I didn't want to perform some version of a fresh start that erased everything that had come before it. I wanted a wedding that acknowledged the life I'd already lived, the daughter I'd already raised, the business I'd already built, all of it standing quietly behind me, rather than being tucked away out of sight. "You look happy," Ruby said, adjusting a loose curl near my temple, studying my reflection in the mirror, with the same careful attention she brought to her paintings. "Not wedding day happy. Actually happy. There's a difference, you know. I remember watching pictures of you and Dad from your wedding, back when I was little, and used to go through the old photo albums. You looked beautiful in those pictures, but you didn't look like this." "What's different?" I asked, curious what she'd seen. At 22, looking back at photographs of a version of me she'd never actually known, since I was already someone's wife and someone's mother by the time she was old enough to form memories of her own. "You look like someone who isn't performing anything," Ruby said. "Like you're not worried about getting it right or looking perfect or making sure everyone else is having a good time before you let yourself have one. You just look like you're marrying someone you actually chose, for exactly the reasons you chose him, without any pressure attached to it." "That's exactly what's different," I said, my eyes stinging with the particular kind of tears that come from being deeply, accurately seen by your own child. The first time, I think some part of me was performing. I was 24 and I wanted so badly to be someone's good wife that I didn't stop to ask enough questions about who exactly I was marrying, underneath all his charm. This time, I know exactly who Marcus is. I've watched him be consistent for years now. There's nothing left to wonder about. Chloe, 17 by then, and considerably warmer toward me than she'd been at that first cautious diner meeting, came in a few minutes later to help pin the small spray of white flowers into my hair, her own dress a soft green that Marcus had teased her about for weeks, since she'd changed her mind about the color 4 separate times before settling on it. "Dad's a wreck downstairs," Chloe reported, grinning. "He keeps checking his tie and every reflective surface in the house. I told him you're not going to care if his tie's a little crooked, and he looked at me like I'd suggested he go out there in his pajamas." "Tell him I love him exactly as much whether his tie is straight or crooked," I said, laughing. "I already did," Chloe said. "He didn't believe me. He said," and I'm quoting directly, "This is important, Chloe. I only get to do this once, hopefully." Ruby and Chloe exchanged a look in the mirror, something warm and conspiratorial passing between them. 2 young women who had, over the past 2 years, built an easy, sisterly friendship neither of them had expected but both had come to treasure, bonded partly by the shared, particular experience of having watched a parent survive something painful and come out the other side determined to build something better. "You ready?" Ruby asked me, once the flowers were pinned and the dress was smoothed, and there was nothing left to adjust or perfect. "I've been ready for years," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." She gave a toast that evening that I still think about, years later, whenever I need reminding of what actually survived the wreckage Colin left behind. "My mom used to tell me that silence protects the person doing the lying, not the person being lied to," Ruby said, holding her glass up in the soft evening light, the string lights catching gold in her hair. I didn't fully understand what she meant until I got older, until I watched her rebuild an entire life, an entire business, an entire sense of herself, using nothing but honesty and hard work, after someone she trusted completely tried to convince her that trust meant staying quiet. She taught me that love isn't about pretending not to see the cracks in something. It's about being brave enough to look at them clearly and then deciding, honestly, what's actually worth building on top of. Marcus, I've watched you be honest with my mom in ways I don't think she experienced for most of her first marriage. I've watched you listen to her, really listen, the way people are supposed to listen to each other. I'm grateful you found each other. I'm grateful my mom finally gets the kind of ordinary, unglamorous, deeply honest happiness she always deserved. I cried through most of that toast, holding Marcus's hand under the table, watching my daughter stand there in the golden evening light, completely herself, completely whole, having built her own understanding of love and honesty out of the wreckage of watching her parents' marriage collapse, somehow emerging from that wreckage wiser and more grounded than I could have imagined possible. Back when I sat crying into pancake batter on that first lonely Sunday morning, all those years ago. Colin wasn't at the wedding. Ruby had invited him, out of what she called basic decency, but he'd declined, citing a scheduling conflict that Ruby suspected, and later confirmed through a mutual friend, had actually been discomfort at watching me build a happy, public life with someone else, after everything. I didn't feel triumphant about his absence, the way some version of myself, years earlier, angrier and rawer, might have. I just felt, mostly, grateful that his absence no longer had the power to diminish anything. The wedding was beautiful with or without him. My life was full with or without him. That, I think, more than any settlement or lawsuit or public reckoning, was the real ending to everything Colin had tried to take from me. Not his downfall, but my complete indifference to whether he witnessed my rising back up. I'm writing this final part of the story 10 years after that first terrible morning, the 2 cups of coffee, the question I already knew the answer to. Ruby is 29 now, a successful illustrator with her own small following, married to a woman named Elena, who makes her laugh in a way I've never seen anyone else manage, not even Marcus, who has his own particular gift for making me laugh in return. They have a daughter, my granddaughter, Wren, 3 years old, with Ruby's stubborn chin and Elena's dark curls, and every Sunday morning, when we visit, we make pancakes together. 3 generations crowded into a kitchen that somehow always feels exactly the right size, no matter how many people fill it. Marsh Bookkeeping Solutions has grown into a firm with 22 employees, 3 offices across the state, and a reputation built entirely on the qualities Colin once bragged about in me without ever paying me properly for them: honesty, carefulness, integrity. Nadia is a full partner now, and together we've built something that will likely outlast both of us, something built on a foundation solid enough that neither of us ever worries about it cracking beneath our feet. Colin, from what I understand, through the increasingly thin thread of mutual acquaintances that still occasionally connects our lives, never fully recovered his old confidence, his old certainty that the world owed him admiration, regardless of what he actually did to earn it. He's tried, over the years, several more small ventures, each one smaller and less ambitious than the last, each one eventually undone by some version of the same pattern: small lies, small shortcuts, a fundamental unwillingness to simply do the honest work required to build something real. Ruby still speaks with him occasionally, a careful, distant relationship that she's built entirely on her own terms, loving him without illusions, protecting herself without needing to hate him to do it. Priya and David are still married, still happy, from everything I hear in our now rare but always warm exchanges. Frank Delgado retired from Marsh Office Supply entirely 5 years ago, selling his remaining stake to the new management team that had taken over the daily operations after everything fell apart, walking away, from what I understand, with his reputation intact and his conscience clear, having done the hard, uncomfortable work of exposing fraud even when it would have been easier to look away. And me? I'm 49 years old now, married to a man who has never once, in 10 years, made me wonder if he's telling me the truth, which turns out to be a form of peace I didn't fully understand I was missing until I finally had it. I still run every morning, a habit that started as a way to clear my head after Colin's betrayal, and became, over the years, simply a part of who I am, independent of anything that came before it. People still ask me sometimes, When they hear this story in pieces from mutual friends or old acquaintances, whether I ever think about forgiving Colin completely, moving past everything entirely, the way some people believe you're supposed to, eventually, if you've truly healed. Here's what I've come to understand, 10 years on. Forgiveness was never really the point. I don't spend my energy hating Colin anymore. It's true, and in that sense, maybe I have forgiven him, in whatever quiet, practical way that word actually means in real life, outside of greeting cards and self-help books. But I don't think healing ever required me to pretend the harm wasn't real, or to erase the consequences that harm rightfully earned him. Healing just meant building a life solid enough that his choices, and their consequences, no longer had the power to define mine. Ruby asked me once, years ago now, whether I regretted anything about how everything played out, fighting for the business, exposing the fraud, refusing to protect Colin from the truth the way I had for so many years before. I told her then, and I still believe it now, I regret that any of it happened at all. I regret 12 years built partially on lies I didn't know about. But I don't regret, not for one single day, choosing honesty over silence, even when honesty was harder, even when it cost me things I thought, at the time, I couldn't survive losing. Silence protects the person doing the lying. I learned that lesson at the worst possible moment of my life, sitting at a kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, waiting to ask a question I already knew the answer to. But I've spent every year since then proving that the lesson works both ways. Honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something precious, is also the only thing capable of building a life sturdy enough to actually hold real happiness. The unglamorous, ordinary, deeply earned kind. The kind that doesn't crack apart the moment someone finally looks closely enough to see how it was really built. Last month, Ren turned 4, and we had a small party in the backyard Marcus and I had married in all those years ago. The same oak trees taller now, casting wider shade over a yard full of balloons and half-eaten cake. Ruby sat beside me on the porch steps, while Elena chased Ren around the lawn, both of them shrieking with laughter, and Ruby leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was small enough to still fit easily against me. "Do you ever think about how different this would all look?" Ruby asked quietly. "If you'd stayed? If you'd just kept protecting Dad from the truth, the way you used to, and none of this ever happened?" I thought about the question seriously, the way I always tried to answer Ruby's questions, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. I think about it sometimes, I admitted. Not with regret exactly. More like looking at an old photograph of a life I almost lived, feeling grateful I don't actually live in it. If I'd stayed, I think I would have become smaller every year, not larger. I think I would have taught you, without meaning to, that love means shrinking yourself to fit whatever space someone else is willing to leave you. Instead, you taught me the opposite, Ruby said. I tried to, I said. I don't know if I always got it right. I know there were years when I was tired and scared and didn't have all the answers, and I probably let some of that show more than I meant to. You got it right enough, Ruby said, watching Ren toddle across the grass, arms outstretched, chasing a butterfly she had no chance of catching, laughing anyway at the simple joy of the chase. Look at her. She's never going to know a version of this family that isn't built on people telling each other the truth, even when it's hard. That's because of you. That started with you, at that kitchen table, all those years ago, deciding you'd rather know something painful than keep living inside something false. I watched my granddaughter running across the same grass where I'd married a man who had never once, in all our years together, given me a single reason to doubt him, and I thought about Colin, wherever he was that particular Sunday afternoon, still chasing some version of the life he thought he deserved, still, as far as I knew, unable to fully understand why that life kept slipping through his fingers, no matter how many times he tried to rebuild it. I didn't feel anger toward him anymore, sitting there in the late afternoon light, surrounded by 3 generations of a family built on honesty instead of performance. I didn't feel much of anything toward him at all, which was, I'd come to understand, its own quiet kind of victory. He no longer occupied space in my thoughts rent-free. He was simply a chapter, a difficult and formative one, in a story that had gone on to become so much larger and richer than anything he'd been capable of imagining for either of us, back when he still believed I was too predictable, too easy to manage, to ever build a life he couldn't control. He was wrong about that, in the end, more thoroughly wrong than he probably ever let himself understand. I was never easy to manage. I was simply patient and loyal and willing, for too many years, to give someone the benefit of a doubt they hadn't earned. Once I stopped extending that particular kindness, once I let the truth stand on its own without my help propping up his version of it, everything he'd built on top of my silence came apart exactly as quickly and as completely as it deserved to. What I built instead, in the space where that old life used to be, has turned out to be sturdier than anything Colin ever managed to construct, precisely because it was built on the one material he never learned to work with: the truth, plainly stated, consistently lived, generation after generation, pancake batter and burnt edges and all. Wren fell down in the grass just then, the way toddlers do, and for one held breath everyone on the porch went still, waiting to see if the fall would end in tears. Instead, she pushed herself back up, laughing at her own stumble, and kept running after the butterfly as if nothing had happened at all, already certain, in the deep, unthinking way small children are certain of such things, that the people watching her would always be there, ready to help her up again if she needed it, telling her the truth about whether she'd done something silly or something brave, and loving her exactly the same, either way. That, I think, watching her run, is what I actually built, in the end. Not a business, though I built that too. Not a second marriage, though I'm deeply grateful for that as well. What I really built, starting from a kitchen table and 2 cups of coffee, and a question I already knew the answer to, was a family where falling down is never something to hide, where getting back up is simply what you do next, and where nobody has to wonder, even for a moment, whether the people around them are telling them the truth.